Then it's Spurling. That show, mama, you know what I'm talking about. Mama, that golden man, he just talk a lot of shit. He be up late at night, tuning into all his hits. See my grandmama hate him.
That's my motherfucking business. You ain't got a goddamn thing to do with it.
And made the deal what settlers had claimed. Now, there were already black people here. We talked about that last night. Check that broadcast out. But I'm talking about the Africans who were brought here in chains. But see, by the time the American Revolution occurred, enslaved Africans were already the economic engine of the South, fueling tobacco, cotton, sugar, and rice plantations. We were unpaid labor. We created a surplus of wealth that funded the colonies and later the republic. Look at the timeline. By the time the major waves of European immigrants arrived in the mid to late 19th century, and I'm talking about the Irish, the Italians, the Eastern Europeans, and the Germans, the United States had already fought and won its independence in 1776 to 1783, ratified the U.S. Constitution in 1789, built the White House, the Capitol, and the foundational federal buildings. Such much of it was done through slave labor. We expanded westward via the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. We created functioning agriculture and trade economy run by slavery, by the way, black people. And we had a growing university system, the colleges like Harvard, which was established in 1636, Yale, which came about in 1701, and I believe Princeton was in 1746. We had complicated railroad systems, canals, and roads. This is the early infrastructure built by enslaved African people, okay, who were here. We fought the wars of 1812 and laid the groundwork for the Civil War. So by the time Ellis Island opened in 1892, this country wasn't being built. It was already standing. You understand? Even the industrialization, a process often falsely credited to immigrants, was built on the backs of black labor. The cotton economy made the U.S. the world's top textile exporter, and that cotton was picked by black slaves, not immigrants. The textile mills in the North were powered by the raw materials grown by enslaved black people in the South, in the Mid-Atlantic. The Mississippi River, the New Orleans port, and the plantation system created the infrastructure that made America globally competitive by the mid-1800s. Wall Street. Wall Street itself was a slave auction site. Slavery built the American finance. When the immigrants arrived in mass after the Civil War in 1865 and onward, they arrived in a country with a constitution, a Bill of Rights, established courts, schools, post offices, a functioning military, a tax system, cities, farmland, railroads, and banks, universities, and the educational system. They didn't build a foundation. They benefited from it. They were able to open their businesses and claim land and build unions and rise socially and economically, often by stepping into the systems that foundational black Americans were excluded from because of Jim Crow and redlining and segregation. Foundational black Americans built this country under duress, and we paid for it in blood. Late Native Americans lost it through genocide. It was FBA who maintained it through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the Civil Rights era. So when people say immigrants built this country, they are insulting you because they are erasing the fact that foundational black Americans were here before America was America. And that country's very existence, its land, the labor force, the original wealth was carved out by conquest and slavery, not no doggone immigration. Set the record straight. Immigrants didn't build this country. They arrived after it was built, after the hard part was done, after the blood had been spilled, after the infrastructure had been laid. This nation was founded by settlers and built by slaves, maintained by Black Americans, and only later populated by immigrants who benefited from that foundation. And to rewrite that history is not just incorrect, it's an erasure of our suffering and our contributions and our sacrifice. Let's stop repeating this lie, family. America was not built by immigrants. It was built by settlers, and it was built on the backs of foundational Black Americans by force. Now, let's talk about entitlement. The entitlement that kind that radiates from certain groups of immigrants who arrive in the United States and without understanding our history or our hierarchy, start acting like this country owes them something. And it does. I don't think anybody, whatever your political affiliation is, whatever your color, your ethnicity is, we're tired of that. Because that entitlement is unwarranted. Because contrary to popular myth, you did not build this country, you inherited access to it. Let's be clear, you did not fight for this land. You didn't build its original wealth. You didn't suffer 400 years of forced labor, racial terrorism, and redlining of Jim Crow. You didn't bleed for the Constitution. Yet many immigrants walk in and expect instant parity with people whose ancestors were dragged here in chains and all others who was here before the Mayflower and who built this country brick by brick and never received justice or reparations. That sense of entitlement to me, right, to land, to resources, jobs, political power, and sympathy is not just historically inaccurate, it's strategically foolish because you're missing one critical truth. America has no problem expelling people it no longer needs. And that's what these Latinos and other folk are finding out. This country has always had a transactional relationship with non-white labor. Once your labor is no longer necessary, you're out. Now, what we're going to do at this point is we're going to look at some historical records. Get your pens and paper out. I'm going to start off by talking about the Mexican mass deportations in the 1930s and 1950s. You're going to learn something today. So what was going on? Well, when the Great Depression hit in the 1930s and white folks couldn't get jobs, their jobs dried up, the government forcibly deported 1 million Mexicans, and that was over 60% of them. 60% of them were U.S. citizens. They didn't no due process, no hearings, no distinction between legal or illegal status. They were rounded up. They were taken to train stations and public parks and welfare offices, and they were dumped across the border. Again, in 1954, during Operation Wetback, the U.S. deported another 1 million Mexicans in brutal sweeps. People died from heat stroke in the desert. Entire families were split. American-born children were left behind. Why? Because the machines were replacing the agricultural labor, and the need for cheap Mexican workers was shrinking. America used them and then removed them when they didn't need them anymore. Do you all know they had a plan to remove black folk after slavery was over? They planned to send us to Liberia and Brazil. Are you all familiar? Liberia is in Africa. Did you all know that? Let's go a little deeper. See, America didn't just expel immigrants. They tried to deport the very people who built this country, the foundational Black Americans. In the 1800s, political elites, including Abraham Lincoln, openly supported the colonization, which was the idea of shipping formerly enslaved Black people to Liberia or Brazil. Because even after centuries of unpaid labor, the system wanted to get rid of us. We were no longer in use anymore. And the American Colonization Society, funded by elites and presidents, was founded for this very purpose. And here's the thing, over 13,000 Black Americans were shipped off to Liberia. Many were sent against their will. Brazil was considered because they still practiced slavery all the way up into the 1880s. And they would say, yes, send them down here. We need some more Blacks. I want you to let that sink in. But the other thing is the very people whose blood and bone and sweat that built this country and this infrastructure and economy and the legal framework, at the moment our labor was unneeded, we were treated as though we were expendable. And that's what you have to understand. Once your labor is no longer essential, you're subject to be deported. So ask yourself, if they try to remove us, right, who are the blueprint of America, what do you think they'll do to immigrants, especially illegal immigrants with no foundational claim, no sacrifice, and no blood in the soil? Think about that. Now, when immigrants started demanding open borders and free benefits and political representation and protection without acknowledging the hierarchy of contribution, they walked into a trap.
Mama, that go that man. Mama, that go that man.